Encouraging topic. The world's attention is now focused on Israel and the war with Hamas in Gaza. Israel have launched an offensive into the Gaza Strip in retaliation for the heinous acts of terror perpetuated by Hamas, a terrorist group that was actually elected into power in Gaza over a decade ago. Now, as predicted on this show when the attacks were launched, the world was at first horrified by the Hamas butchery, but it quickly turned their blame to Israel, decrying the severity of the Israeli response. Conveniently, the world ignores the anti-Jewish poison that is so pronounced throughout Gaza. The people there are fed a steady diet of propaganda like this, and a warning, this is distressing.
على العموم يا روان انا بقول له يمسك حجر ولما يجي اليهود عنده يمسكوه وبوم.
طبعا ليش حابه تصيري شرطيه؟ ليش؟ زي مين؟ بيسوي طب الشرطي؟
بحبس الحرامي واللي بيعمل مشاكل
وبتطخي اليهود صح؟ انت بدك تصيري زيه؟ ان شاء الله لما تكبري.
لما طخ اليهود
كلهم؟ كلهم؟ طيب.
That's from Palestinian Media Watch. It's appalling, isn't it? But it does demonstrate why Gaza has been a safe haven for Hamas, why so many people there are complicit in supporting their goals. Few media will report on this, and fewer still will highlight the rare voices against Hamas in Gaza. Here's one man decrying Hamas, using the people of Gaza as human shields. And note how quickly the reporter moves away when the truth is actually spoken.
لم يتخبى يعني هذه شهادات من المواطنين بسبب يعني هذا
Yeah, you probably couldn't tell what he said there, but nonetheless, he did say that Hamas was appalling for using Palestinians as human shields. And then the reporter just moved on. Joining me now is someone familiar with the often ignored expose of the propaganda. That's Joel Burnie. He's the Executive Manager of the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Joel, thank you for your time. I've got to start with this, right? In times of war, all sides engage in propaganda. I accept that. But the type of hateful bile about Jews spread on Palestinian television over decades, and particularly that targeted at kids, is simply reprehensible.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this evening, Cory. And yes, you're absolutely right. The indoctrination and poison that's fed to Palestinian children, certainly since Palestinian Media Watch, the organisation that you speak of, has been monitoring this for nearly 30 years, is quite disgusting, as your viewers have just seen. So I myself have two young daughters. One is probably around, one is just turned 3, similar to the young girls that were on that couch. That are on Palestinian television saying that they want to grow up so they can shoot Jews, and not just one, but all of them. So organisations like Palestinian Media Watch have been monitoring Palestinian television for a long time, which is just littered with grotesque anti-Semitic references, whether that be the televised sermons of imams that constantly refer to Jews as apes and pigs, or these TV shows for young children that teach them the pursuit of what they will call shahada, which is martyrdom in their pursuit of killing Jews, as young as 3, as you've just seen. Now, we'll add in the context of the propaganda war, you showed that short clip of the patient in the hospital. Now, that patient was saying that Hamas were evil for placing themselves in the corridors of the hospital, and then that Al Jazeera reporter then moved the camera away because it's an inconvenient truth that the world should know about and is unfortunately not being covered enough. The other problem is, so the propaganda war is alive and real. It's not just what has been on Palestinian television before and what is fed to them on a daily basis, but also plays a role in the endangerment of civilians trying to get out of dangerous areas in Gaza through the propaganda that's fed to them by Hamas. The other problem is that the language that you've just shown through that television program is similar to the language that we all unfortunately heard on the streets of Sydney just a couple of days after the massacre on October the 7th, kill the Jews, kill the Jews. So whilst we have to look to what is being shown on Palestinian television and monitor that type of toxic anti-Semitism, we unfortunately too, Cory, have to look close to home to see what's being taught to our children here.
Oh, we certainly do. And you mentioned about the imams who are preaching on Palestinian television and their broadcasts. Well, we've seen them here as well. Nothing is done to them as they're calling for violence against Jewish people and the creation of an Islamic State in Australia. But sticking with this Palestinian school kids for a second, I've got another clip here which I want to play. It's some Palestinian school kids going out for a walk. Have a look. All right, so Joe, you saw them calling for bombing of Tel Aviv and getting rid of the Jews again. How can there ever be a resolution to this dispute and this conflict around Israel, centering around Israel, while these vile thoughts are injected into school children and it's actually accepted and embraced by the community?
I think that's a very important question, Cory, and it alludes to the fact that the world is very quick to suggest and point fingers at Israel as to what it should do in the pursuit of resolving this protracted conflict. But something as simple as to the information that you're feeding your population, especially your generation of youngsters, is also critically important to that process. So there are two things that I'll note about that. The world, especially Australian viewers, need to understand that Israel is in a difficult neighbourhood. It has neighbours that are different to Kiwis. The Palestinians in both the West Bank and Gaza, as you've just shown in your clips, hold particular views for their Jewish neighbours that they are supposed to live side by side with in an eventual peace process. So it is incumbent on Palestinian society, led by their own leaders, to create the foundations for peace instead of their constant demonization and incitement against Jews and the glorification of Jewish death. They should be preparing their population for the hopeful and eventual end of conflict and peace with their neighbours. The other thing is, Cory, it's very important to note that the terrible atrocities that occurred on October the 7th were not exclusively done by members of Hamas. Many civilians, some estimate in the hundreds, also penetrated Israel's borders on October the 7th and participated in the rampage, including the taking of hostages. So the type of information and poison that's fed to the civilian population, I think motivated many on October the 7th to commit the same heinous crimes that Hamas was leading as well.
Yeah, and we all saw that footage of them cheering on the parading of dead bodies through the streets. It was just horrific. But it brings me to this point. I mean, realistically, if Israel rids Gaza of all the Hamas militants, isn't it then a Pyrrhic victory, as it's clear that many of the residents of Gaza do hold these same extreme hatred for Jews? They want to see the end of Israel. And even Hamas say their jihadis are civilians. Have a look at this.
فنحن نعرف أن المجتمع الفلسطيني هو مجتمع مدني، حتى أجهزة الأمن والشرطة والمرور والدفاع المدني كلها كما تعرفون أجهزة مدنية، حتى المجاهدين في المعركة والميدان هم في الحقيقة مدنيون فلسطينيون يقومون بأداء واجبهم الديني والوطني. ولذلك يعني مسألة التفرقة حتى نقول سيارة مدنية، هدف مدني وكذا، لأنه لا يوجد لدينا جيش نظامي وأهداف عسكرية حقيقية كما يحاول الاحتلال أن يروج.
So the attitude is that these people are fulfilling their moral and religious duty and they're civilians. So is it now a case of you have to take, or Israel has to take back all the land in Gaza in order to protect the Jewish state, and then what happens to the civilians that are there?
So I think that Israel's grappling with this currently, Cory. It's in the midst of a very large-scale military campaign where it's focusing on the north of the Strip at the moment, and it will progress over the next couple of weeks into the south. And then I believe that they'll make those calculations then. I don't believe it's in Israel's long-term interest to have a permanent military presence in Gaza, but there is no doubt that the conditions that we've experienced since the violent overthrow of the Palestinian Authority by Hamas in 2007 when they took over the Gaza Strip, that can no longer continue. Israel needs to make sure that it changes the paradigm. So, for instance, Cory, about 9,000, up to 9,000 rockets have been shot and fired indiscriminately into Israeli towns since October the 7th. That has to stop. We cannot go through another round where these rockets and these missiles are indiscriminately being fired into Israel's south. Now, in the midst of the violence and the war that's currently going on, I've spent a lot of time in the West Bank with West Bank Palestinians, and I'd like to think, and this may be a little bit idealistic, but I'd like to think that many of them are very similar to Australians, that they care for their children, they want to work, they want to provide for their children, they want to live a very simple and happy life. So I do think that there are many Palestinians like that. So if Israel is able to get rid of Hamas, or at least the structures, the political structures and the military structures of Hamas, it will not only be doing a great favor to the citizens of Israel, but it will be doing a great favor to the Palestinians, especially those in Gaza, to rid them of this authoritarian regime where they can have the freedom, Cory, to choose that life if they so choose to.
Joel Burnie, that would be a favour to the world, let me tell you. Thanks so much for joining me on